Welcome back to the Low Stick Podcast. I am Jason Retz.
And I'm Eric Dettman.
All right, so we came at you a little faster than a month. We had all kinds of interest wanting us to push this thing out, so we figured we sit down and record this first one and get it out to you, and so everybody can enjoy it. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I'm pumped. I'm super excited to get back at it.
All right, so we're going to talk about some threshold training today, and we're going to walk through some of the things we've learned and how we use it and potentially how we're screwing it up and how we're getting it right. So let's just start at the top with what is threshold training? So by the book, what's threshold training?
Yeah, so Jack Daniels describes threshold training as running done at a comfortably hard pace for about 20 to 60 minutes. Runs of this sort shouldn't be longer or shouldn't last longer because they're done at a pace in which blood lactate is starting to build up in the body. And essentially what that means kind of in non-super science terms is just that blood lactate is starting to cause fatigue within the body. And we're going to dive into what that means for us and how we go about that process with our athletes. And it's something I'm really excited to talk about because it's probably my favorite thing that we do. So should be a really good podcast today.
Yeah. And I think as we get started, I know when I did threshold training when I was a kid, we were similar, but we probably didn't go long enough. And oftentimes we probably went too hard. Anytime I think when I was a kid and we heard the word threshold or we knew it was a workout, we thought we had to get something out of it and just work our tails off. And I think that whether we listened to the paces we were supposed to run or we just ramped it up, we were probably not in that threshold range. I don't remember having very many conversations while I was having workouts when I was a kid.
Yeah. And I, to be honest, don't remember doing any really specific threshold training with Mr. Newton during the cross country season. I know we did some variations of it in track and field, but Mr. Newton was so interval heavy with quarters and 200s, and we did some segment stuff. Like, I don't know that we ever did anything that was threshold specific. So I think I was really introduced to it once I got to college at the University of Oregon, and that was a big piece to Andy Powell's program that I really appreciated, and it was fun to start to learn something new and implement from there. So yeah, a little bit different from you.
When you got to the University of Oregon and started doing some threshold work, in your brain, was it translated to you what you should be feeling? Was it conversation pace? How did it start for you as you started threshold?
Yeah, my first couple sessions didn't necessarily feel that way. I was maybe because it was newer to what we were doing. I remember the first ever workout I did at Oregon, we were doing 2Ks at threshold, and I was with our freshman recruiting class or incoming class, and it was a bunch of heavy hitters. And then we were led by Galen Rupp, who, obviously everybody knows is arguably the greatest American distance runner of all time. And this other guy, Pat Werhane, who was an athlete on the team. And I remember after like one, some of the kids dropped off. And after two, like people were dying and everybody was just trying to like size each other up. It didn't feel very thresholdy.
It was racy.
Yeah, it felt more that. And a lot of times, I heard this description of threshold training a couple of weeks ago that I really liked is like, you have the ability to have a conversation, but you don't want to. And I think we got past that not want to part to absolutely can't. But as I progressed, and really probably my junior year is when it like really started to click. And there were some workouts where I walked away and I'm like, dang, I'm fit. And it was because of some of those big threshold workouts that we were able to do that were able to give me some of that confidence. So yeah, it took me a little bit of time to get used to it, but I really like it. Really, really like it.
As we've evolved in our program, I started similar to how I was taught in the high school and even in college. I think of my college running experience, and I raced every day. I think my PRs probably come from workouts I did that were not on the track. And so evolving it as a coach has been a lot of fun to listen to some great people educate me on what it should look like. And, the one common trait that a lot of successful programs have is they are throwing threshold workouts in year round, every cycle. It's something that they're hitting on a very frequent basis. And I think that in our program, we are very big on it. We are hitting it several times during a cycle, whether that be at the end of a long run or dedicated to it specifically. I will say that early season, mid-season, off-season, it's always there. It may look a little different, but it's always there.
Yeah. And are you, and I think I know the answer to this question, but are you doing threshold training late into the season? 1 week, 2 weeks before your state competition, are you guys still doing threshold training?
Absolutely. It's a great way to have the body adapt to a stimulus without tearing it apart.
Mm-hmm.
I think of it almost like a boxer. We had some MMA last night. I don't know if you saw the Gyllenhaal intro for his
Yeah,
thing, right? But it's seriously like a boxer. If you're going to take a body punch, right? Most people can recover from that pretty quick, but you take too many of those, it's going to take you a longer time to recover. Well, when we look at workouts, you look at a VO2 workout, that's like right uppercut. We
right.
look at a threshold workout, it's like a body blow. It takes a little bit out of you, but you could probably take 50 or 60 of those before they're going to put you on the ground. Now, depending on who's hitting you, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be someone close to my skill level.
Right, absolutely. So what does that look like? You're talking about doing threshold, super late into the season, and we do the same. How is that progressing from, first week of practice or first month of practice to, the last week of October as you're gearing up for the state meet?
Early on in the season, including the first couple of weeks of the summer, we're trying to be fairly continuous with how we do our threshold work. We will try to get kids to be 3 to 6 miles continuous at threshold pace. I think that having them at a longer stimulus is going to help with that adaptation period. And I also think it's important for kids when we stretch it out to that length to know what it should feel like. If I shorten it up for them, sometimes they'll get going too hot and won't be able to complete it. But if they know that they're going to have to go for freshmen, let's say 3 miles, and tell them it shouldn't feel like a race, for some of them, they tune in a little bit better to what that pace is supposed to feel like, instead of trying to jump up to the next group and getting out and going too quick. As we get later in the season, it's going to get a little bit shorter. We will oftentimes split it up into Ks or as of recently some 2Ks, and we can talk about that here in a minute. But as the season goes on, we'll chop it up just a little bit, try to get into that zone. We don't need 60 minutes worth of it. If we can hit somewhere 20 and 30 minutes of threshold work late in the season, I think it's a huge benefit. What's it differ for you?
So we will start. I mean, we're going to go year round, right? Like when I think back to a week before our state meet, we do a lot of threshold stuff at the end of our long runs, kind of like a progressive threshold, and our kids feel really good about that. They respond really well to it. But we'll start it early in the year, and it'll be shorter reps. It'll start initially with some minute on, minute off type stuff at threshold pace, kind of a reintroduction. And some of that is just because we tend to give our kids tend to take a little bit longer off than most. So we'll start with some minute on, minute off, then we'll progress to some 800s by kind of mid to semi late July. We're going to do mile repeats, and then from there we're going to jump into 2Ks, and that's kind of our max in terms of distance, where we're going to do a bunch of 2Ks. And the reason behind that, and it's something we started doing 3 years ago that I really like, is kind of twofold. One, I think as a running community, there's so much emphasis on the mile, and everybody thinks about the mile, and anybody can get to a mile because it's all we know, versus trying to get to a 2K. I think there's a bit of a mental stimulus of like, oh, I've got to focus for an additional period of time. That's an uncomfortable period of time, or different from what I'm used to period of time. And then I really like 2Ks from a training perspective, because for us, it allows some of our, if we've got a range of kids, let's say it's a 16-minute and a 16:30 kid, it allows that 16-minute and those 16:30 kids to train together. So cross country is this team idea, team sport. We want to keep these kids, packed up, grouped up as often as possible. If they're going to run 4, 5, 6 straight miles, like that gap is going to open up. Right. Whereas if we're doing 2Ks, we could keep those kids together, and maybe by the end of the second 2K, it's starting to get unthresholdy for that 16:40 kid, but then he gets a minute rest, the heart rate can come back down, we can recover a little bit and dive back in. And he may not do, or she may not do as many reps, but I found that works really well for our program, and really like the team component, but also the mental component to it as well.
So the idea in my brain just popped up as we talk about this stuff. For those of you who have any background on threshold training, you're essentially just trying to glorify a fartlek.
Right.
you're just trying to break things up and make it more continuous, splitting it up into 2Ks, whatever it looks like, but you're trying to have that continued stimulus for a period of time. I think back to, like we talked about, we would do 800s or we would do 600s at threshold, but I really never felt like you got in that sweet spot. And I
Right.
think what you're doing with the 2K and what we're doing, trying to be continuous, kind of gets you in that sweet spot a little bit more effectively than it would chopping it up.
Right.
And if, in my opinion, if your kids struggle even at the distances we're talking about, making it fartlek style is a great option.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Especially as an introduction for some of our newer kids. Like, you can describe the ability to talk but not wanting to do so to a new kid, and that really doesn't mean that much, even though it seems pretty self-explanatory. Like,
Right.
a new kid doesn't understand fully what that means, of like, I'm out of breath if I just go run 100 meters. What does that mean? Like, I don't want to talk at all. So I think, keeping things a little bit shorter for some of those new kids really, really helps, and then progressing from there. And yeah, it's worked for us, but that doesn't mean that it would work for everybody. And I look at your program, and there's certain times that I've even been talking with my staff of like, maybe there are certain individuals where they just need 3 or 4 straight miles. And maybe we go back to that for some of those kids. But I know for us, that sweet spot has been 2Ks, and it's been pretty sweet.
Well, and we talk about geography. You are in Portland on the side of a hill, and I'm
Right.
in central Illinois, where I can literally see 30 miles down the road, standing out my driveway, right? So
Right.
us being continuous is a lot easier to achieve, assuming we don't have a crazy headwind to go against, than you, because you climbing one hill, unless you're running the river, is going to probably take you out of that threshold range.
Yeah, totally. And I think, that's a great point to bring up, Jason, because it's, we talked about this in the very first episode of, finding out what works for you. Like, being in the city, we don't actually have access to that many great places to run a long, continuous effort. So on the weekends, we can go out to Nike and run on the Hollister Trail, which is really great. But all of our 2Ks, we're doing it on the track, because that's kind of all we have access to. And our kids have realized that that's what we have access to. And, it's not always the most glamorous workout, just doing rep after rep after rep on the track, but it works for us and it's helped us. So that's a great point that you bring up, is like trying to, work within your surroundings and within, kind of what your barriers are.
And we have started to try to do some 2Ks as well. And one of the things we've done is we've gone in lane 8. And one of the reasons I've gone out in lane 8 is because they don't focus on their split as much, right? They can focus more on their body. They can almost get lost in the workout. We did it the other day, and kid flies through the mile faster than he thought he was by far. And he went through the mile and finished, and he said, it's like, I can't believe I went that fast. I felt like I was running the threshold. And I think for us, that mimics what we do on a consistent basis, being continuous out on the road, where we don't necessarily know where 1 3/4 miles are, or where 2 miles exactly is. I mean, obviously, if you're checking your Garmin and you're looking, but it doesn't have those marks, right? It lets you feel the rhythm of a threshold, which I think is important. I think
Right.
that also, people will get caught up in the pace of a threshold, and that's not what it is.
Right.
It is all about how you're feeling, and like you've described, being able to have that conversation even if you don't. I've ridden with the kids, and especially some of the younger kids. I will try to have conversations that have nothing about the workout during a threshold workout, just to see where their brain is at, right?
Yeah.
If they can carry on that conversation about what color that truck is that just went by, they're more apt to be more relaxed, as opposed to ignoring me and focus on what they're trying to do.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. So let's talk about, we've talked about kind of what our definitions are, and we've talked a little bit about what, how it works within our program. Let's talk about often, so we know we started early. We're doing it throughout the course of the season. What does that look like early in the season? You talk about doing continuous threshold runs. As we're progressing through the season itself, we're getting to the state meet. How much volume are we doing from a threshold standpoint? How often? Are we still doing it once a week, twice a week? What does that look like within your program?
So during our long run, we will take the last 10 to 20 minutes and we call up tempo, which is essentially threshold work at the end of our long run. So that is going to stay continuous for us all the way until the end of the season. And for those of you not in Illinois, for us, our last long run is 2 weeks prior to the state meet. So it would be the week of our qualifier for the state meet. And we have a long run on that Monday before, and we will run threshold or up tempo work at the end of that long run. So it is present in that form, continuous all season long.
Mhm.
Now, within our 14-day cycle, we're probably going to hit another threshold. We potentially are going to run on the track. We may run 300s and then go out and run 2 to 3 miles worth of threshold work after that is over, right? It's going to be a little shorter, but we've done something prior to it to help us get into that threshold zone. So it's going to be present in every regard with that long run the exact same way all season long. And the modification is the specific threshold workout that we'll be having. It'll still be there, maybe a little more choppy and probably a little bit less volume, but we still want to make sure we hit it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because I think when I first started coaching and started writing workouts, like I had this idea in my head that like, as we get, closer to the end of the season, later in the season, like, oh, threshold training doesn't become as important, or it's something that we should eliminate entirely. And kind of what changed my mind on that, honestly, I think is one of my college teammates, a guy named Matt Centrowitz. And he talked about, doing what works consistently for you. And if it works for you, stick to it. And he talked about how, 10 days before he won a gold medal at the Olympics, like he was doing a threshold workout. And that was kind of an eye opener for me of like, oh yeah, we should be doing that year round. Of course we should be doing it a week before the state meet, because it is a really valuable tool, and it's what's helped us to get there. The kids are familiar with it. And in a lot of times it's a great confidence booster because they walk away from it running fast, feeling great. Like I think back to our district state meet experience in Oregon. And for us, your district meet is 10 days before your state championship. And those last 2 weekends, the weekend before districts, the weekend before state, like we were doing a long run and we were running a progressive threshold at the end. And one of my top girls, her PR, and we'd had some poor racing experiences in terms of smoke and heat and just different things that didn't necessarily allow for fast courses, which is fine, but sometimes that can be a bit of a lack of confidence booster. And at the end of a long run, she runs her last 3 miles in like 19 minutes, and her 5K PR was like 19:04 or something like that. And she's like, oh my gosh, it felt so easy. And that's when she knew, like, I'm ready. And then 4 days later at our district meet, she runs 18:22. So yeah, I think it can be a huge confidence booster.
Yeah, for sure. And you hear coaches who will finish their season and Monday is 5 by 500 and Tuesday is 4 by 500. And I kind of grew up in the era where that was kind of your thing is people would taper off at the end of the season. But the longer we do this, the more we know, like, that's just not how you do it. You keep things present the way they were present all season long. They may be a little bit less, but those efforts are still there. You're still going to have some type of hard effort. I mean, we're talking about threshold, but we know that towards the end of that season, we're still going to have some type of VO2 type effort.
Right.
Probably the week of the state meet, right? We want to make sure the body remembers what it's supposed to do. And if it's worked, why change it?
Totally. And I like throwing a little bit of threshold stuff, late in the season. It just is as a part of the warm-up process for our kids. Like, it sounds silly, but we'll do some stuff at threshold pace. I don't know if they're getting the benefit of it, physiologically, but I think it's really helpful just from a warm-up standpoint, because I think a lot of high school kids have a tendency to not warm up, to the best of their abilities on practice day, as much as we preach that. So we'll incorporate some of that into our workouts just to help with that as well.
Now, that brings us to our next point. I've heard some really great coaches that say if you're going to include one thing, you need to include threshold workout. And I think that both of us have done some modifications to some workouts to help us try to get there. So we know that it's going to take 8 to 12 minutes for you to technically get into your threshold, right? Mm-hmm. What are some of the things you do as you, you mentioned running 2Ks. What are some of the things you do to help yourself make those workouts a little more sexy for kids, or to help them get into their threshold?
Yeah, I think something that we started doing this spring that I've really liked, and you and I have talked about this, off the podcast, but we've started, there's this idea of doing 200s or 300s after our threshold or our tempo work. And we've started doing that actually before. So a workout for us could look like 3 by 3 by 300, starting at 5K pace, the second set at 3K, the last set at 1500. So they're moving pretty well, with a lap jog in between the sets. And then we'll get into doing some of those 2Ks. And we've done it twice now. And I really like the results. One, because oftentimes when we're doing threshold work, it seems like for the first 2K, we're not really getting anything out of it. Maybe by the time we're getting through that second 2K is we're starting to get some of the benefit of that threshold work. I was talking with Scott Christensen, who, leads a bunch of the USATF classes. I think he's a coach up in Minnesota. I think his claim to fame, one of them.
You got lots of them.
Yeah, is he's had the most kids that he coached in high school who have gone on to be sub 4-minute milers, which is pretty cool, which is really, really cool.
Now, I will say that I'm going to have to check the math after the surge of sub fours here this year.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. But I was on a coaching call with him, just kind of bouncing some ideas off him. And he talked about that there's a lot of validity to what you're saying. Like we're jumping into that threshold, and we're actually probably we're in a place where we're above what our threshold should be, but we're getting back into that zone pretty quickly. So doing these 300s, taking about 5 minutes, and then we're diving into it. And what I've noticed from our kids is the first one is like, oh, that didn't feel so great. And by the time we do our second and third one, they're like, yeah, I felt great. I feel really good. That felt easy. And then like the last one, earlier this week, we kind of, I asked them, can you run X pace? And they're like, yeah, I think I can run X pace. And I said, okay, just run that pace, make sure you feel good. We're not getting out of control. We're not trying to run too fast. And then they were 10 seconds faster than that pace and walked away from it feeling incredible. So I think that's something that, just in the last 6 months, we've made some adjustments to, but it's been, that's something we'll probably continue to do, just because I like the idea of, that first 2K kids are doing, they're already getting the benefit of some of that threshold work.
And I think you're onto something there, being a little quicker early in the workout and then slowing it down. We've all done ladder type workouts before, and we are not talking about a ladder type workout, right? We're talking about two completely different sets of stimuluses to try to finish having longer threshold without having to do longer threshold. And I think that if the kids walk away, like you said, even though they're going a little quicker and they may be quote unquote faster than their threshold pace, that feeling is way more important than what that time is on the watch. If that's what you're getting out of it, that's successful, right?
Yeah.
Being quick early, falling into that rhythm is a great way to do it and break it up.
Yeah. And even, some of my kids, I don't know how much I trust like the heart rate monitors on some of these, Coros or Garmin watches or whatever. But even one of my kids came back, he's like, yeah, my heart rate was only like 145 during that session. I'm like, that's amazing. That the fact that you're not beating at, max heart rate as you're turning over, pretty quickly. I think that in itself, similar to what you said, you take out the science part of it. The art of it is like those kids are walking away from that session feeling really confident. And at the end of the day, I would argue that that's more important than any physical attribution.
Right. Now you're getting those mitochondria to fire correctly. This is what I know about science, right? You're getting those to fire correctly and they're smiling. That's all you need, right? You're getting it to work.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, you guys, more straight threshold, is there anything that you guys are doing to try to get into that zone quicker? Or is it just the length of time, no stops? Like we know we're going to get into it within 6 minutes and it's a progressive, experience for these kids.
So with us, we try to be as continuous as possible, but because of the way the wind is around here, oftentimes we will have to split it up. And we have done some faster stuff prior to, but what we like to do is just try to cut down on that rest interval and try to keep them as engaged as possible. So give you an example, you have a freshman who runs, let's just say 3 miles at 6:20 pace, for their threshold work. You get a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks into this thing, and all of a sudden they're seeing that effort continuously gets easier and easier, and they get excited because now they're saying, now I'm running what I ran in junior high for my threshold pace, and I can run it 3 times as far. So the excitement of doing it continuous early in the season kind of builds that momentum of what we can do late. And I think it helps build that trust. If they're able to just knock it out of the park earlier, I can split it up. For example, it's going to be probably 25 mile an hour, 30 mile an hour winds here on Thursday when we're supposed to do our next one. We will probably go out to a state park, and there's no way I'm going to be able to get continuous out of it. So I'm going to have to break it up. And I think that that's going to be easy to do because they've felt that ball rolling with the success that they've had early. And we're not on a track. We're going by feel. Some of it will be in the grass, some of it will be on the road, some will be on the gravel, right?
Yeah.
But having that sensation and getting there, I think is going to be effective for us.
Yeah. And going back to your freshman comment, how awesome is it when you have a freshman who, comes out new, maybe not, but just a freshman who comes out and they run, X time for 3 mile or 5K in cross country. And next thing you know, that spring, they're doing their threshold work, true threshold work at that same time. And I feel like you see that pretty often because there is that big jump. We have a couple kids on our team where I'm just like looking at them like, where did you come from in the last 5 months? Like you couldn't do that 5 months ago. And now you do it, you walk away and you're like, okay, cool. What's next?
I would argue if your summer or your off season is consistent of mileage and threshold on 1 or 2 times a week, and we phrase it as challenge yourself. If it consists of that, those kids are going to make such a huge jump because they're not used to that stimulus at all. And it happens
Totally
so
agree.
quick. Happens so quick for them.
Yeah, let me ask you. So we talked a little bit about progressing threshold over the course of a season, starting early, in terms of distance, volume, pace wise. Are you progressing threshold over the course of the season, or they're going to run 5:10 pace on July 15th, and they're going to run 5:10 pace on October 18th?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think during the cross country season, we don't adjust it quite as frequently because our goals during cross country races are a little less defined than what they are during track season. Track season, you have so many sample sizes. But during the cross country season, we do not run as hard as we can as often, right? So we try to get them in that rhythm and that pace. And we've talked about this with not only geography, but the heat, in August and in September in Illinois, you could be on a beach, in Mexico. It's so hot and sticky, as the season drags on, you're going to run the same pace significantly easier, even if you're not more fit, just based on the weather.
Right.
So we only progress that pace. At least we try to hold it no more than a month apart. So we'll get one at the end of July. We'll probably get one at the middle of September. And then we'll probably get one more in the middle of October, right before we start our state series, so we can finish off with our current fitness level. Track, early on especially, we may adjust that every 2 to 3 weeks early on in the track season, not knowing what kind of fitness we're in. You get a couple races under our belt. If we had a great winter, we may make a significant jump, but I always try to lean on the side of conservative.
Yeah, I think we're really similar in that sense, and probably ultra conservative early. Like my top girl, whose threshold pace is probably like 6:05 to 6:10. Like early in the fall, she's probably running 6:30, 6:35. And then we're going to progress that pretty quickly. And I think for us, from July to August to September to October, we're probably trying to progress about 5 seconds per mile. But once we get to October 1st, like there's no more progression because we're not improving that much at that point.
Yeah. And I think it's important that, when you get into this and you're trying to do it and you're plugging it into a calculator or putting it into a graph, that you do lean on the side of conservative.
Right.
Not all calculators are created equally. You plug in an 800 time for a kid that is good. The 800, that is not exactly going to be what his time is.
Yeah. Anytime I use those calculators, I mean, I really like the Tin Man one. I think it's super easy. I think it's a great tool for any coach. But I'm always, if it says threshold 550 to 603 or whatever, like I'm always putting 603. And if a kid feels good and wants to run 550, and the range is never that big, but they can do that as long as they feel good. But I don't want them to feel like they have to, just because I think it can get pretty aggressive. To your point of like an 800 kid is not built the same way aerobically as a 3K, 5K kid.
Yeah, I look at the conversion table sometimes on my PRs. I'm like, man, I was terrible at that race. I'm like, no, get that out of your brain. Like, that's not the type of athlete you were. That's not how it adds up. All right. So as we get to the end here, let's talk about this. All right. Some of the things we agree on. Okay.
Yep.
We know we need to keep this thing present all the time.
Yep.
If you're not doing threshold pace at least once a week, or once your cycle, whatever that looks like, 10 days, you need to make sure that you're including it in there somehow.
100%.
Run, whatever it looks like, right?
Yep. 100%. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Also, work is work. If you're going to do something fast to get into that threshold, great. If you're going to make it continuous for the threshold work, do that, right? Whatever's going to fit your style and where you're at. We do something different based on our geography as opposed to what you do. I honestly don't know, if I was you, given your situation, how the heck I'd pull off 6 miles at threshold without them running 8-minute pace in the middle of it trying to go up the hill.
Yeah.
Just not gonna happen.
Totally. And I think it goes back to what we said earlier. Find what works, within your program. Everything is accessible if you make it accessible. You just might have to, kind of make a couple changes based on what works for you.
If you're going to make a jump in your program, you're going to throw threshold work in. I mean, yes. I think that we both agree on that 100%. And I would say that the improvements that we've seen, the top 10 lists we've had, have all come not because of some crazy other workout we've had. It's by the amount of stimulus time we've had at that threshold pace.
100%. Yep. Yeah, we're agreeing on a lot today.
I agree, but we get there differently. And I really like that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's cool to see that. And I hear, the way that you talk about it with some of your kids, and I think back to some of my kids and wonder, like, it could make more sense for some of those kids to do the continuous stuff. So it's something, after conversations with you, I'll certainly probably visit at some point.
Yeah. And, I don't have 250 kids out on the track, which allows me to go in lane 8, like we talked a little bit about. But all right, so coming up for you, hopefully in our next episode, we're going to talk about training female athletes. We've both been fortunate enough to coach some wonderful female athletes along the way, and being male coaches, it adds some hurdles along the way learning. I think about my very first year at Charleston High School, and they told me I was coaching the girls, and I didn't even know what good was. I didn't know what splits looked like. I didn't know how fast people should be running. So we're going to explore some of that, maybe talk a little bit about Wildwood along the way.
Yeah, Wildwood Running. My assistant coach, Marie Markham, and her partner, Robin McGillis, who's a head coach at a local private school here in Oregon, started Wildwood Running to promote lots of different things within women's running, but focusing on mental health, menstruation, periods, making sure these conversations are happening. Just doing a lot of really good stuff for the female running community. So excited to kind of dive into that a little bit and talk about our experience with coaching the female athlete.
Yeah, and I can say firsthand that Wildwood has definitely helped me become better at coaching female athletes and having those difficult conversations. So we hope to get into that next time. Until then, thanks for joining us. You can subscribe to us any way you know how. Share it with your friends. I guess out there, we want to help you. We do have an email that we will put in here, so you can get to us that way if you've got questions or things you want to ask. So until then, it's good seeing you, and we'll see you in a month.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Excited to talk again.
All right. Enjoy.